here we go. So yeah, fantastic. Welcome along. It would be really, really good if everyone, some are new, some not so new, but it'd be fantastic if just in the chat box, which you should see in the right-hand corner of the screen, if you just put your location. We've got everyone from Hales Owen to Kenya on the line today, so I'm kind of looking forward to that. So if your profession that you're in, your location, and most importantly, since we feel some lockdown being eased, what's the first thing you really want to do, apart from haircuts? Because haircuts is the obvious one. What's the first thing you want to do when lockdown is fully eased? So while you're going through that, I'm going to tell you, Keith Rosell, I'm a sales coach, 30 years in HP and all those kind of places, and very fortunate to have a long corporate sales career. I'm now a sales coach, and I'm a visiting lecturer at Aston Business School in the subject of professional selling. Welcome along if you just joined the call. Last deal I closed, I won a client just last week. I'm put in place, so the point is I practice what I preach. So I put in place a LinkedIn sort of campaign to build my first line connections. And I've just won it's probably my third client that I've won out of that particular campaign, but that was the last sort of client that I onboarded just last week. She's a PhD looking to start her own business as well. So my clients run from generally not corporates these days. There's not an area I focus on, but I focus on smaller companies that want to sell into corporates and individual sales coaching skills, and then one-to-many like this. So a bit about me. So there is a lot to get through today, but I have pressed record, and I will get you a copy of the recording if you've registered. Excuse me. If you've registered, then you'll automatically receive a link to that recording later on. So I'm gonna rush through it at normal speed if that's okay today. So as you know, we're running a B2B sales process, starting at the beginning and ending at the end. Today we're on number 5 in the sales process. We started out with value proposition, go-to-market strategy, how are we going to sell our stuff, and we're going to generate some leads. We're going to do some deal qualification because we're going to get some leads back, and remember, leads are just an opportunity to do some work. There's no definition around whether you're going to get paid for that or whether you're going to win or what. So we've got to qualify those opportunities. Today, however, we're in pursuit strategy, which is a term that not everyone will have heard of. And certainly before I got into sales, I hadn't. Big deal sales anyway, I hadn't, but a pursuit strategy, we'll define that in a second. And then afterwards, the forthcoming webinars, every Wednesday at 11 a.m. We're going to talk about negotiation, which is next week. One of my favorite. It's such fun, unless your mortgage is dependent on it. And then it becomes much more, and I've been there, and it becomes somehow not fun, but maybe there's a way that we can kind of turn it to our advantage, and all those butterflies that you have in your tummy when you're starting out on negotiation, maybe we can get them to fly in formation and act on your behalf, kind of going forward. And then we're going to talk about closing the sale. And of course, closing the sale isn't the last one in the process, because there's some stuff we've got to do after we've closing the sale. How about delighting the customer? How about getting some referrals? And all the basic stuff that most of us, myself, are guilty of that on occasion, that we don't follow through. So we're going to talk about maximizing yield. Welcome to the call if you've just joined. Okay, so it's a bit of housekeeping, bit of definition, but a pursuit or win strategy. How do we define that? Really, it's the process or the resources that you're going to need, which could be money, could be budget, could be which colleagues or contacts you're going to have to leverage or harness the support of to win a lucrative deal. Now, lucrative is a very loose definition, but somehow it's valuable to you or your company, and value is measured in many different ways, as we all know. It's very subjective, very personal, and that's why I use that particular term. Now, the disclaimer is, if you've been around in business as long as I have, you do far more than you probably should do through intuition instead of a structured kind of formal analysis or appraisal where you kind of peer review a decision. A lot is done at the intuitive level. So the disclaimer is that most of the deals that you win for your company or what you do for a living are business as usual type stuff. You don't have to do too much thinking. Yes, that makes sense. Let's move on. Let's do that piece of work. But just occasionally, however, something comes along that could be really important for your company, a game changer of some kind. So what questions do you need to ask to go through that process before moving forward? The assumption is, so you've qualified the deal, which we talked about a couple of weeks ago in webinar number 4. You actually want to win it. And that may sound obvious, but you need to agree that you want to win it first, because if some do and some don't, then that can lead to frustration and wasted effort, and sometimes even duplication of effort. Okay, so if this sounds like a lot of work, it is. And it's a really important piece of work. You have to go through it, and you have to get all your ducks lined up, so to speak, to go through that process. So is it important enough to win? If it is, we're all agreed, then we need to move heaven and earth to win it, because we've all agreed it's an important deal, contract to win. And I'm sorry if that sounds a bit Barrow Boy deal, but that's sales talk. So there you go. Right, so big deals. First of all, they're all relative. If you work for a massive corporation, and I've worked for some of those, then they're probably going to be massive deals defined in perhaps the tens or hundreds of millions, possibly even billions if they're really, really big. But they're typically £1 million plus of contract order value, COV, contract order value. And the reason I use that term is because you have an annual revenue or an annual sort of income from a particular contract, but it might be a multi-year contract. So if you've got a contract worth, say, £100,000 a year, but it's a 5-year contract, then the contract order value would be £500,000. I hope that's kind of obvious. But a strategic deal is all relative. And so if you're in perhaps a small firm, an SME firm, which can be 250 employees and smaller, then a smaller deal could be perhaps a business sector that you're not currently active in. So that could be a pivot of some kind. Now, the obvious one at the moment is in strategy, where we've all had to move to an online model. So perhaps we were used to working face-to-face, a different way of doing things, and all of a sudden along came a virus and we're all having to move online. Now my own business is a little bit like that, but I've been working online for a couple of years. It's just that I'm working exclusively online now, as are we all, and that's why we're kind of here. So that was an example of a pivot. And we'll talk about maximizing opportunities in webinar 9 in a couple of weeks' time. So a strategic deal might also be what we call a bragging right. It's an Americanized term, and I don't apologize for that, but maybe you've all of a sudden comes an opportunity where you get to win a household name client, a new logo, which is really, really valuable. Obviously, all clients are valuable, but some clients are valuable over and above just the revenue they produce for us. There are bragging rights. We won Unilever, or we won Thomson Reuters, or we won something like that. Is just, it takes you in a different area, and there's real value just in that name. Just being able to sound check that name has value all of its own right. And the overriding sort of priority is if your company feels it's needed. So you might have your own definition of what a strategic deal is, and I want to respect that. So if collectively you as a sort of pursuit team or as a management team feel that extra attention is needed to a particular contract, then you should honor that and go through a particular process. And I'm going to show you on this webinar just the kind of questions, the kind of activities you need to be exploring together to decide whether to take this forward or not. Okay, because you have the option, you have rights as business owners and as individuals not to pursue a particular deal. But it's important to know if someone was to look you in the eyes and say, "Why aren't we doing that?" You've got, you know, well thought out reasons to answer that question. So they can be, and I don't want to put you off, but this is the cold hard facts. They can be really expensive to pursue, both in terms of people, in time, to prepare a bid or to go meet the client. And there may be multiple meetings required with clients, but not just one person, many people. That's the whole point of a pursuit strategy. They can be expensive in terms of internal resources. You may not have, some of you may work for companies that are large enough or work for clients that are large enough to have people on the bench, so to speak. So they're consultants, or they've got some subject matter expertise, they're working on a particular account. You may need to request or second those people onto your team. So that can be a difficult process to go through and may require some, what I would call, courageous conversations with their line managers, with them as individuals, about persuading them to join your pursuit. They may be experts or consultants in their own field. And it can be risky. Obviously, there's risk attached to almost everything these days. It could be your sales budget line. I've worked on pursuits before where I've had to go to my line manager and work on a pursuit that takes up 20% of his annual budget to pursue sales. And that requires a lot of support from a line manager, a lot of support from other people in the organization to say, yes, we really want to win this. And it's a balance of judgment. And sometimes your line manager may have competing priorities. It may be, Keith, I know you really want to win this, but we've got resources allocated over here. So much as this is important to you, it's not nearly as important to the organization as this other deal. And those are the cold hard facts. We've all got finite resources to play with. Again, sometimes deals are here's the other cold hard facts. Sometimes people are sat on the bench for a reason. Maybe personality-wise, they're not going to get on with the client that you have in mind for the pursuit that you have in mind. Maybe it just won't work. So you need to make sure you get the A team working with you. And if you can't assemble the A team, that may be, and I've been in this position once or twice before, just couldn't get the resources. It's upsetting, but sometimes that's the deal. And then we decided to no bid, because it's frustrating to go through a process only to find out in the last minute that you've lost. And it's because, you know, client A couldn't get on with employee B, and that happens. Here's another thing. Sometimes selling to the client is the easy part. Sometimes often the internal sell, the marshalling of resources, the competing for budget, sometimes that's actually harder than selling to the client. And those, again, the cold hard facts. And the context, what happens if you're a listed company? Well, every company has value, first of all, but if you're a listed company in particular, what happens to your stock price if everything goes to plan? And also what happens to your client's stock price if everything goes to plan? If your deal on the table is big enough, it may affect their share price. I've been involved in several deals that do that, where that's a consideration at board level about what's going to happen to the share price. So it's currently here, and it's here because our costs in IT are bloated. We need to reduce them. If we do that, we think we can get to the share price to this share price, an increased share price, because that's a reflection of the effectiveness of the efficiency of the company. Okay, and in every sense, pursuing something like this can be career defining. Your personal finances, okay, so I'm sorry to get intrusive, but if you're going to pursue something, almost by implication, it's going to take some time to do. And all the time you're spending on this deal, let's say, you're not going to be earning any money. So can your personal finances withstand not getting any commission for, in some cases, 18 months? Now, you might be paid a big enough base salary to not worry so much about that, or your finances may be structured in such a way that that's not quite such a consideration. But these are all things that need to be factored in. And even after all that, after 18 months, you may lose. And so that, you know, a big commission check that we're all hoping for, the bonus check, whatever it happens to be, you know, never comes to fruition for a myriad different reasons outside of your control sometimes. And here is the sobering statistic that for big deals, when I was at EDS, a big deal was typically anything over £30 million, which was a surprisingly low number. But the deals, all the deals that were on the table, our analysts got their fingers over them, over the pipeline, what happened over the last 12 months, for instance. 70% of all the deals that were on the forecast, whether at 10% or at 90%, 70% of them didn't happen. And very often that can be for reasons totally outside of your control. It could be because, I don't know, your client's market took a particular downturn. You've got to believe, haven't you? Go back 3 months ago, you might have been working on a particular pursuit. Along comes a virus, a black swan event. Nobody could have forecast that. It goes away. It probably won't come back for probably 2 years. That's life, that happens. So that has to be factored into things. And all responsible businesses will have a forward-looking statement where they'll talk about, if everything goes to plan, this will happen. But these are the sorts of events that, you know, could knock us off balance. Black swan events in particular. So the assumptions are you've already qualified the deal. We did that number 4. You actually want to win it. You've got some win themes. You know why you can win it, and you've tested out with your management, who hopefully will have more experience than just you. Organizational experience that you'll be able to purloin, if you like, or borrow to get you to where you need to be. You'll need the support of your line manager. You'll need the support of the client. What if the client doesn't want you to win? I pause for effect. You can't be so arrogant as to say we're going to win this, because everybody needs to be on board, and that includes the client. We'll go into that in more detail. The client's business ecosystem, and that I'll go into a diagram on that in a bit, but the client is more than about the person at the other end of the telephone or the video screen. The client's organization. If you're selling a big deal, we'll talk about IT in a second, because that affects everyone, not always in a good way. It's a surprisingly broad landscape, and you'll need an executive sponsor. So if you are, I'm going to say just a salesperson, you could be really senior and just a salesperson, but you will need a senior sponsor from your company. If any of you is involved in project management, Nigel, I know you are, but you'll be familiar with the project board. Well, sales for particularly big pursuits are no different. They will have a pursuit board of which the salesperson will be part of. He might be, I'm going to get mixed up with the Prince 2, but he might be the senior user, if you like. But you will have an executive sponsor who is at board level that can say yes or no and influence at that level. They're critically important. And you need an executive sponsor, and they will need to face off with the client as well, because they might have to do some selling of their own part. We'll come into that. Also, you have to look at what happens if you lose, because we already talked about events that are totally outside of your control. Okay, so the main pursuit strategies are head-to-head, and that is literally the way most battles were fought before Napoleon came along. There would be 2 opposing armies lined up, both sides of the battlefield, and they would literally a war of attrition. They would go like that and see how many were left at the end of the day. And that's called a head-to-head strategy. A bit like going in the ring with Mike Tyson, if ever that should prove itself an opportunity. Fractional, excuse me, which a fractional is, well, I'll talk about that in a second, and flanking. I mentioned flanking once on a webinar before. So head-to-head, as it currently sounds, is a bit of a blunt instrument, and there are some prerequisites that go with that. They're expensive because they're very resource intensive, and they're bloody, but they can be highly effective if the right conditions are in place. You need, basically, to sum it all up, you need a 2.5 to 1 advantage over your nearest competitor, and that means you've got more resources to throw at this to persuade the customer to order in your favor over a long period of time. You may have just the best references in this area of doing business than any of your competitors have got, but it needs to be not just a small gap, it needs to be a big delta, a great big advantage to afford to take on a head-to-head strategy. Or it could be fractional. So the customer may have an incredibly broad, they want to outsource all of their IT, let's say. You can't do it all, but maybe there's a bit, and it might be, I don't know, IT strategic consultancy, where you can't take on the whole outsource, but you can really advise the client on a particular piece of it that it's really worth employing just you to do that. Now, there's a risk involved in that, of course, but it might be worth, you need the support of the client to do that. Absolutely. But if you can persuade the client that they're interested in receiving a bid from you, a proposal from you, for just doing that bit of strategic consultancy, and you can demonstrate that you've done that elsewhere and you are just the best at doing strategic consultancy in that area, for example, then that may be enough to say, okay, Keith or Nigel, Sue, or whoever it is, yes, okay, we'll take a bid. But you'll also have to think about, well, you're causing more work for the client by doing that. So what about the rest of it? So they may want to partner or form a consortium. Now, often we do, big companies do this just to de-risk the pursuit itself. So maybe you want to partner with another IT organization who are really good at the day-to-day basics of fixing IT. But your strategic consultancy will sit nicely over the top of their solution, and you need to decide who's going to be prima facie vendor. I haven't got that on here, but this has just cropped into my head. So you need to work out what does the contract look like and who's the contract between the client and which company. And that is often a bun fight all of its own. So these are all things to bear in mind. And then a flanking strategy, which is what Napoleon excelled in. He brought a new sort of facet to warfare, is whereby you just creep up. You'll have some part of your organization, well, maybe you're not going to do far and wide or deep. You're just going to, but perhaps your CEO, perhaps one of the people in your company knows the CEO of your client company really, really well. And so you're gonna creep up, and they're never going to see you coming. But all of a sudden, you form a wonderful relationship with that client out of nowhere, and you've outflanked. That's the point. You've outflanked your competitors. They never saw you coming. They never saw you in the help desk area where all of their consultants are. You were in the C-suite with the chief exec and the chief financial officer, telling them how brilliant you are. And I love that strategy because I've helped clients win like that out of nowhere. That on paper they had no right to win. It's really amusing. It's really amusing when that comes off, and the look of pain on your competitor's face. It's a joy. What can I say? If you love winning, then that's part of you. Okay, right. So the other advantage is it requires less people, less resource, but it does require more political power. Coming to that in a second. Okay, right. Just if I may, just grab a coffee. So this is the landscape in its entirety. It's a, yeah. So let's talk about in typical, because IT companies are typical. They only ever talk to the IT people in an organization, and most of the time that's probably okay because that's your end user customer, so to speak. Um, but who cares? Who else in the organization cares about the effectiveness of the IT department and the resilience, if you like, and the uptime of their laptop or their desktop computer? And the answer, of course, is everyone. Everyone cares about IT. So so all of a sudden, you need to be talking about everyone, talking to the key people in an organization that care about IT, because often if the IT doesn't work, if you have an outage of some kind, um, then the organization just can't function and everyone goes home for the day, metaphorically. So everyone is interested in that. You've got to work out as part of your pursuit strategy, apart from IT, because clearly they are important in some context. Who else cares about IT? Well, the finance people will, absolutely. So the chief financial officer very much cares how much IT costs his organization. That's the one thing you can be absolutely certain on, is he cares a lot about finance. And forgive me if any finance people are wrong, but sometimes finance people will come to a decision because 9 is less than 10, let's say. So your skill as a salesperson will be around persuading them why it's worth paying 10 and not 9. But paraphrase, but there it is. So if it's a really, really big deal, we talked about share price, then you may have to speak to people outside of the client company, and you have to do this very discreetly because you don't want to startle the horses. There can be regulators. You may have to have, and then you have to be really careful with regulators because they will not want to be seen to be involved. But you can game play stuff with regulators if you need to. At Heathrow Airport, for instance, people game play with the CAA, the Civil Aviation Authority, all day long. What happens if I do this to Heathrow Airport, or what happens if I do this to some other airport in the country? What would happen? What are your concerns? What would need to satisfy you in order that it was okay to do this piece of work? That's a conversation to have. And shareholders, for instance, in the bottom left-hand corner, shareholders care a very great deal about share price and trend on share price. So if you're going to do a deal with a company, whether it's big or small, but if it's share price affecting, and I'm trying to think of an example, but there are plenty of examples where, so Aston Martin, let's say, they're about to restart operate. They have already restarted manufacturing of their cars for anyone that's interested. And if they've got to observe social distancing. So if you're doing something, perhaps you're social distancing consultants, and you're going to all of a sudden halve their production capacity, then shareholders are going to be absolutely concerned about that, and you will need to persuade them that there's no other way, for instance. And that's a conversation that you might want to consider having. And the other stakeholders, of course, with your client are their clients, because they care very greatly about that. So what's going to happen if your deal, if your proposal accepted, what will happen to their clients? Will they get a higher level of service because all of a sudden, I'm going to go, I hope no one's on here from a broadband provider, but if anyone has been on the phone to a broadband provider over the last, say, 2 years, then you'll realize that you can get stuck in a really long queue. Now, if your proposal means that you're going to halve queue times because of some efficiency that you're going to bring into place, then the external clients, the ones that really make up the numbers for your own client, that can be a really interesting conversation to have. And through the glory of personal networks, not just the IT hardware network, but the personal networks that we all form, be it face-to-face, LinkedIn, whatever, if you know people, then that is a political resource that you can bring to bear if you are thoughtful, skillful, resourceful enough to bring that about. So we're in the land of, it's not what you know, it's who you know. I did tell you a few webinars ago that will never go away. And this is an example of, and LinkedIn is a wonderful tool for doing this. I wonder who knows the CEO of Vodafone, for instance. And I'll bet if you, and it's Nick Jeffrey, by the way, that's public information. But if you went onto Nick Jeffrey's profile on LinkedIn, I'll bet most of the people on this line, probably one or maximum two connections away. Nick's got a really big network anyway, so he's a fairly easy target from that point of view. But it's really interesting, and you can map out if you need to get a message to someone like that, or maybe it's the House of Lords. I don't know, but it's actually, if you, with a bit of forethought, bit of strategic planning, you could get a message to that person to say, "Can we meet? Is my proposal of interest?" Something like that. Decide what your message is. Okay, right, I've gone into that, and I need to be kind of careful with time. Okay, right, so we did talk about, and this may not come out fully clearly on your screens, and I apologize about that, but basically we've got two lists of names here. One on the left-hand side with a bit of yellow highlighter. I'm here because hopefully I'm good at strategic selling. I'm not so good with PowerPoint. So I'm going to apologize up front for that. But the stuff that's highlighted in yellow on the left-hand side is your client. And the stuff that's not highlighted is on the right-hand side of that table is your internal resources, your people. And then at the top of the table in red text are the chief executive and the C-suite people. And you're going to effectively match up your C-suite people with their C-suite people. Now, they may not know each other yet, and your goal as the, what I would call the orchestra conductor, because everyone thinks of salespeople as being, I don't know, schmoozing, taking someone out for dinner, golf, all of that stuff. But sometimes you've got to be a project manager. Sometimes you've got to be an orchestra conductor to be an effective salesperson. Sometimes you've got to create the situation where your CEO can meet with the client's CEO to deliver a message. And if that sounds like a scene out of The Godfather, actually you're not too far wrong. It's about sitting with someone else, having at that level, using the language that they all use in the C-suite, and part of your skill is working out what is the message and when does that message need to be given. Is it at the very end of the pursuit to tip us over the top into being selected? Is it at the very beginning of the pursuit to give us some impetus and know that we've got the support there? Or is it at some other point? That takes a great deal of skill to figure out. And that's just one. So I did tell you this was a lot of work. Okay, right. And then the people below the red text are the, what I would call the day-to-day, and they could still be senior managers, but the day-to-day organizations about buddying up with the IT director, or with the operations manager, or with the marketing manager who really cares about access to technology and social media and all of that. Yes, exactly, Lindsay. CEO, CFO, C-suite people. Excuse me. So exactly, and you're going to have to work out who buddies up with who. And as a salesperson, you're the orchestra conductor, and you need to. And some of those are going to be courageous conversations because you're going to be dealing with some big egos. Yeah, absolutely. You're going to be dealing with some big egos, and you've got to, and your art of persuasion is going to be brought to the fore. You're going to really need to get to the bottom of that. So that's a table just kind of indicating that multiple conversations are having at multiple points in time, but all moving in the same direction towards winning that deal. Okay. Okay, so a relationship assessment. Now, let's have a look at this. So this is a sense check. So it's a series of questions, and I didn't put all of them up here because there are 144 questions that I ask. And this is just a selection of them. So on the right-hand side of the table, you see a few numbers. And at the top of those columns, you'll see key individuals in the client organization. So there will be the CIO, the CFO, et cetera. And I've deleted their family names to respect GDPR, frankly. So the pursuit that I've worked on. And a score of 1 to 10 of how we feel about a relationship. 1 is very poor. 10 is undoubted, they will support us. That's basically where that goes. And then a sample of questions on the left-hand side, and I will read them out. The sense check is this person vocal about our company's capability and the value that we can or could bring to their organization? Are they vocal? Are they proactively vocal? They say, man, Nigel is brilliant. He will do wonderful things about it with us. Have they sponsored? We talked about executive sponsor earlier on, but have they sponsored us into strategic meetings that they've initiated? So have they ever invited us in to talk about, now if you're an expert in your field, health and safety, etc., have you been invited in by this client to talk to perhaps their line manager or someone else in the organization as a noted expert in that particular subject? Be it whatever your particular, be it HR, be it health and safety, be it IT, whatever it is, have they proactively? That's a really good indicator of how that particular person feels about you. Have they ever helped you create or position a proposal that's differentiated and a winning value proposition? We talked about value proposition in webinar number 2. Vitally important that you get that right so that the right messages are understood by the client. And have they ever initiated, phoned us up, emailed us in order to tell us about a new opportunity in the account or to increase the probability of our sales success? A vital bit of information which we can, for context maybe, that we can include in our proposal. Perhaps there's a change in budget, perhaps there's a new project, perhaps they're acquiring a new company and therefore they've got increased scope of needs for this. But have they ever done anything proactively? And you need at least 12 people in the client organization to come to a decision about who's more powerful than you. So you need a bit of data there. And I did say it's a lot of work, and I wasn't wrong, was I? Okay, so next. So the whole thing about asking all these questions is to work out who's really powerful in an organization and where are our best relationships. Now, hopefully they will coincide. Our best relationships are with the most powerful people in that organization. And wouldn't that be a beautiful thing if that would happen every time? And that's why you use a flanking strategy, because you only know 2 or 3 people, but they are just the most powerful people. People like Boston Consulting Group, Bain & Co, McKinsey, they will know people like that. So they won't know everyone, but they'll know a few, key contacts, etc. Banks also are really good at that, particularly right now. Okay, so this is a measure. Those 8 or so 10 names that you saw above the chart previously, I've dragged across to this part of a table, given them a total score, and you'll notice that the top one there has got a score of 30. Excuse me, which is really, really good. But unfortunately, he's not very powerful. The people that and we've also got some reds on there, which is not normally a good sign. And again, it's not in this case, but it is so there are a number of people there that are potential adversaries. They are not supporters of ours, and it could be simply that they just don't know us. We don't know them. But if you don't know them and they don't know you, it's unlikely they will support you over someone that they do know. They talk about better the devil we know. Okay, so excuse me. So this is about where to invest. So we can see, if hopefully you can see a little bit on the chart, that you have got some supporters. 2 of them are actually turned out to be, and this is where we started off in a particular deal. We had virtually no support, a couple of people, but there's a lot of work that we had to do. And this helped us understand where to invest some time. So those reds if they're really influential in the organization, they're really powerful, we know that we need to, metaphorically, bang the door down, get some time with them, face to face with the right experts. Now, you may be the expert in your company, and spend some time with them, and to the point where they are now a supporter of your company, or you recognize they are never ever going to be a supporter of your company because their best friend works for Accenture or something like that. And this is about people, so it happens all the time. So don't be upset when people are friends with other friends. That happens all the time. Your job is to work out what's happening. Okay. Right, so this is just another way of explaining that power is all relative. And so someone might be, and it happens a lot with technology. So as an example, if you want to sell a video conferencing system, or I don't know, some new software application that looks really good on a bit of paper, and the marketing director says, "Wow, this is really, really good. We must have this." But there's a technology subject matter expert, generally much lower in the organization in terms of organizational authority or power, but they might be the expert on latency, on bandwidth usage, on all sorts of stuff related to technology. That person, much lower down in the organization, could scupper a deal. No, we're not going to get that because of these things here. So although they want us to buy an app, which is £2.50, it's going to cost £100,000 to buy enough telecoms and network bandwidth to be able to drive that app to the extent that we need it. So all of a sudden, your small proposal, I know this is a good idea, becomes a really bad idea because it's actually going to cost a lot more money than we originally thought. They can scupper deals, and they're much lower down in the organization, much more difficult to identify because they're not normally good with people, so they don't meet that many people. But you've got to find out. And those are part of the questioning sort of technique that you're going to need to adopt to be able to move around in an account. Okay, so gosh, this feels like a bit of a download. So I'd like to leave just 30 seconds for you to think about what we've talked about for the first 45 minutes or so of this morning. God, that flew by. And I'd like you to think about perhaps a client or a potential client. Perhaps you haven't approached them yet. And just for yourself, don't want to see it in the chat box, but who are they? What would be the benefits of winning some business there for you? What would a deal look like for you, just in your language? What would you need to do to win that piece of business? Who would you need to be in contact with? What would you need to tell them? What happens if you win? Does that mean you have to drop other clients because it's going to take so much more of your time? I hope not, because dropping clients is always a risky business in itself. And what if you lose? What if you spend loads and loads of time working on that particular pursuit and you lose it? And I'll talk about this in just a second, but if you learn much more from losing than you do from winning. But a good combination of cash and wisdom is a beautiful thing. Yeah, okay, right. I hope that's given you a bit of food for thought. Let's kind of move on. In terms of some takeaways, an executive sponsor, I can't underscore how important that is. Quick cautionary tale, I lost a deal once. It was worth about 16 million a year on the past 3 years spent, and this is 20 years ago. So that was a lot of money back then. So I lost a deal. I worked for a big corporation at the time, and I went to a debrief with the procurement team, And they, I'm paraphrasing now, but they basically said, Keith, we really like you, we believe in you, but we don't believe your company is right behind you. And since this is about more than you, we need your entire company to be behind us. We've decided not to award it to you. We've decided to award it to someone else, um, whose company did demonstrate that they all wanted to win that deal. So, and that's an example of in a big deal where it's not all about you, it's about others, the support of your organization. I needed an executive sponsor for that deal. I should have had one. I didn't. I learned loads from that. And if I'd have had an executive sponsor involved who could be bothered to, this guy was the Olympic torch. He never went out. We had the devil's own job to get him to go and visit a customer. Can't believe it, being a sales director as well. But anyway, so I needed an executive sponsor that demonstrated a similar amount of passion, if you like, for that deal as me. So that was a lesson learned. Executive sponsorship. Is it worth it? We're going to put in all this work. Are we going to get a great big return for it? So it's reasonable to ask that question. What's the size of the prize? What are we going to win? That's really important. And that number, whatever it might be, is the number that you need to be consistent with this. That's the number you need to be going around the rest of your company to marshal resources, because if you put your resources on this deal, we will win all this revenue. What do you need to do to win? Who do you need? When do you need them? Why do you need them? What are they going to do? Have you personally got what it takes? Now, that's a very difficult one to ask yourself. Have you personally got what it takes? It takes a lot of confidence, it takes a lot of courage to marshal the resources. And what extra support might you need? Do you need a mentor? Do you need a buddy who's done a deal that size before in that company? Now, it might be your line manager. Ideally, it wouldn't be. Ideally, you should get a mentor from either in the company or outside the company, but someone who has done it before and can and is solely on your side, not on the side of someone else in the organization, but is on your side, wants to help you win. And so if you haven't done a deal like that before and one isn't available to you internally, then just think about that. How will you manage your sales manager? Because we talk about managing down in an organization or managing other resources. We should also be thinking about managing up. And I can assure you that's probably more pivotal for your professional career than managing down. But the ability to manage up, which I found really, really difficult, is vitally important to that. Managing your sales manager and possibly even his manager as well. Davina, okay, good to have you on the call, Davina. We'll catch up in a couple of weeks. Thank you. Okay, so who needs to say yes, both in your organization and in their organization? So you need some champions. Champions are people in client organizations that will sell on your behalf. They'll proactively promote you or your company. Or detractors are people that do the exact opposite. And if you've been around enough, you may you'll know that they exist, unfortunately. And who could say no in the client, both in the client organization and in your own organization? Because we all talk about everyone needs to say yes, but there are some people who are so influential or so powerful, they can say no, and it all comes to a shuddering halt. And like that technology illustration I gave you a couple of minutes ago, they're not always the most senior, but that's the example of real power, political power in an organization, is someone that can say no, and it's actually a powerful enough no to stop it all happening. Okay. Now, here's the truth about hope. So, okay, we don't know all the answers, but we really hope. We really hope it's going to come home. We're going to bring home the bacon. We're going to put bread and butter on the table and all of those things. Hope is not a strategy. I think it was the late, great Tommy Docherty who said, luck is what I get after I put in 100%. And I firmly believe that in a concept, even though I wasn't a great supporter of his football team. But that is the truth about hope. Hope doth not butter parsnips is the Lancastrian phrase. Okay, so again, what happens if you lose? I can assure you there is a downside to losing big deals. And I can say this now because I work for myself, but if you work for a company, if you're in business development, or you're a consultant, but you're involved in business development for your client, there is a downside to losing. So managing up, managing resources, and managing expectations are vital in all of this. Let people know there is a risk. You're taking a risk. There's a political risk. Okay, thank you, Ewan. I'm not sure what you were referring to, but whatever it was. Okay, so what if you lose? So personal experience. You can't do it all on your own. I hope I've illustrated now. You need the support of others. Very much like success. You cannot succeed on your own at anything. You will need the support of others. So be nice to people. You'll need your personal networks and other people's networks too, so that you can reach high into a company, or reach broad, perhaps a technology analyst who can give you a feel for what your deal would do to that. If you work for a big company, you're going to have a relationship with an investment bank as a client, that you will be a client of theirs. That's part of the ecosystem you've probably never thought about using before now, but those options are available to you. One of my best mates these days is a guy. When I was working at Hewlett Packard, I was trying to pursue a deal in a US investment bank. And HP have a lot of money, as you might know, and they do a lot of banking business with this particular American investment bank. I couldn't get through to Brian. Wouldn't take my calls. There was a gatekeeper in the way. So I phoned our own CFO and phoned up and said, do you know anyone over at this bank? And they said, yeah, sure, we deal with them all the time. So I hadn't quite intended for this to happen. But anyway, so my CFO friend phoned up this guy in Morgan Stanley, who he deals with all the time, and said, I need this guy to talk to my guy. And just as a sweetener, I'm going to put this deal that you were hoping to close on hold. Now, I never intended that to happen, but within 24 hours, Brian phoned me up and gave me, I won't repeat what he told me, but anyway, we got to meet. We are now firm friends, but that's something that I hadn't intended to happen. I'm glad it happened 20 years later. He's a good mate of mine now. And but it's an example of what you can make happen, and putting all the resources, and you've probably got more resources available to you than you even know. Just by thinking about it, how you can make things happen is really fascinating to watch that stuff go on. Okay, so, and that was before LinkedIn was even invented. It's not always the most senior execs making the decision. We've covered that, especially in technology. The same may also be true in health and safety, actually. It's one of those things that the board is responsible for, but never take any responsibility for. Isn't that right, Ralph? Yes. Yes. Okay. So that so a big deal. I worked with Vodafone, worth a lot of money. The facts are I lost 2 deals in there prior to getting to that big third deal. But the fact was that when we went through the tender sort of process, the bid process, we got to meet some really influential people. So even though we lost the deals, we formed relationships, credible relationships along the way. We got to meet the CFO of the entire Vodafone group, and he became a key sponsor of ours along the way, because we put the right people in front of him, proved our credibility, proved our investment in the account. We weren't just going to be here for the one deal and gone tomorrow. We were there for the long term. We demonstrated that. That's important, because clients want to know that you're invested, you're committed to their business. Okay, fantastic. Pause for breath. Okay, so now we are into last 5 minutes. So I just want to talk about next week. We can talk about how do you negotiate everything from negotiating with your children. And if anyone's got young children around the house, you're going to have to do that on a minute-by-minute basis, I'll bet, during this period of lockdown. And I've got 4. That's why I look like this. So negotiation is really, really, really important. And both in a professional, and it's a life skill. I firmly believe It's a life skill, not just a professional skill that you wheel out between 9 and 5. Okay, so how do you negotiate is the next one, next Wednesday at 11 a.m. I'd really like to see you on the call and others. So if you get a chance to spread the word, please don't be shy. Excuse me. Oh, the parsnips. Yes, absolutely, Ewan. Okay, so I've been battering on about this in Leeds free trial. To my best of my knowledge, no one's actually used that yet. It's your time, but this works for me. I think I'm quite good on LinkedIn anyway. But this has given me something like 350, 400 extra connections in the last month or so that I wouldn't have otherwise got because I completed a questionnaire and it's done it all for me. And I've got a £250,000 deal on the table with a client organisation that I work for already out of nowhere. So I would encourage you to I will, along with the recording when I send this out later on, I'll send the link. There's a 2-week free trial. There's no obligation. You'll benefit anyway. But also the deal is that you get 25% off the published subscription price for that service for the first 3 months. You can terminate at any time, but at least take advantage of the free trial. I would greatly encourage you to do that. If you want a one-on-one with me about anything, sales related ideally, but if you want 15 minutes, no obligation, love to do that. Next Monday or Tuesday is generally the best time to do that. Happy to do that. If you want a quid pro quo for whatever reason, a lot of people, and I'm sorry to major on this, but a lot of people are really hurting in business just now. They have seen a 100% drop in revenue, literally, but they've still got all the costs, and that's not a sustainable thing. So if there's something that I can do for you and you've got something interesting for me in exchange, quid pro quo, this for that, I'm happy to talk about. But if I'm happy to talk about anything that kind of helps businesses get moving. And also today, I'm launching a new podcast with my friend, fellow sales trainer, Niraj Kapoor. It's called Thrive in Sales. And it's going to talk about sales tips and strategy. It's going to be weekly. We've recorded 3 shows already. You can access it now. It's thriveinsales.com, or you can look up on Apple Podcasts, Thrive in Sales. And every week we're going to bring in an expert who will show us how to keep well, because we're in demanding professions. We're going to give some sales strategies and tips, but also there's some wellness, some good mental health tips, etc., all wrapped up into a half-hour podcast. We're launching that today. I encourage you to download it and subscribe, and tell everyone else about it. But it's also good fun to watch as well. Okay, let me throw it open in the last 2 minutes. So, does anyone have any questions? If right, okay, Ewan, I'll put some links if I may on the link that comes out a little bit later. C-suite, by the way, is the C-suite, all the chief executives, this C-level, the C-level context, chief exec, chief financial officer, chief marketing officer, chief sales. God, there are so many chiefs these days. You can have chief happiness people as well. I've also come across, but anyway, but that's the C-suite. That's what we're referring to. And also, if you've got any subjects, sales-related subjects that I haven't come across, I'm thinking about beyond webinar 9 now. I don't know you. I've really enjoyed doing these Wednesday 11 a.m. things, and I'm thinking about what might a program of free webinars look like after webinar 9, after we've been through the sales process. So is there something on communications, on pitching, on something like that? Or we're doing some stuff on negotiation anyway, but if there's any specific sales related, maybe it's cold calling, something like that, then I'll happily put something on in relation to that. And all it remains for me to say is to say, thank you. Thank you so much for tuning in. It's been a joy. I've really, really enjoyed it. You can connect with me on LinkedIn if we're not already. There's a YouTube channel there. Message me at keith@salesmarvel.co.uk, or there's loads of stuff going on the website, which needs lots of attention, but it's all there. So again, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for tuning in, and I very much look forward to seeing you next week on the webinar for how to negotiate. Thanks, everyone.